What's up guys, it's Numotus here, and I'm about to show you how to make some really cool instruments out of Foley sounds that I've recorded. All of these sounds and all the instruments that I make in this tutorial are going to be included in my sample pack for December. You can get all of my sample packs and all of my music on my Patreon, so please check out the link in the description. It is some awesome stuff. So in this tutorial, I'm going to be showing you a lot of techniques in Sampler and building instrument racks in Ableton. So stick around, but first let me give you a little preview of the pack. Here's some of the Foley sounds that we're going to be using. So really cool textures, really cool stuff. Most of what we're going to be making the instruments out of are the tonal samples. They lend themselves a lot more to the creation of instruments. And we also got some cool Vox in here that I just grabbed from random YouTube videos like...
Oh! You gonna give me money for shitting on you?
Softer. Louder.
Are you happy now?
So some funny stuff like that. That's definitely useful for EDM. And a couple cool effects. So I always include a couple of these in the packs. And then there's going to be all of the instruments that we're about to create. So here we go. The first instrument I've already created out of this sound, which is just a notification sound from my phone. And I started off with the instrument called Abstract Piano Arp, which is already a preset in Ableton. And then I just dragged this sample in. The first thing you want to do when you're creating an instrument out of a sample is find out what pitch it's playing. So I have a spectrum here on the master, and you want to solo your track and just hover over where the loudest part is, and you can see that this is a B. So up in the instrument, it says A sharp there. I think there was a good reason I did that. Yes, because it's clearly kind of starts there at the A sharp and then kind of slides up a little bit to the B if you watch closely the way that the spectrum moves there. So I set that at an A sharp in here, and this already had an ARP and some random velocity on it, and I added this pitch thing to just bring it up one octave because I thought that sounded better. Sounds like this. So definitely really cool. You can change it so that there's no randomness of the notes. And you can turn the ARP off. And there's this filter LFO going on. This is the Max for Live LFO, and what I've done is I turned the jitter up to 75, but I turned the smooth up as well to 22. So if I turn the smooth off, it gets really crazy. So you kind of need that. And this is linked over here to this filter here. So this is providing a lot of just subtle movement. You also have control over the rate. Bit of color control, control over the compression, reverb, and the attack time of the sample, and a little bit of EQ here at the end. I thought made it a bit spicier. One thing you should know though is that this scale plugin is kind of keeping it in tune with whatever your song is. So you're going to want to edit this depending on the scale of your song. So if you're not familiar with the scale plugin, essentially the MIDI notes that are input into Ableton come down on the grid, And when they hit wherever you select a blue note, that note will output to the right. So basically, wherever you set this bass is going to be the first note over here on the left. So this is an A, and so A is outputting as A. A sharp is outputting as A. G is outputting as A. G sharp is outputting as A, G, G sharp, B. Do you see how this is working? Hopefully you do. If not, so that's a cool instrument going to be included in the pack. And now let me walk you through the creation of some more. So let's start with this little sample. We can go to the master and see that this is right around a G. This one I included as a simpler, just in case you don't have the full version of Ableton and you're only using simpler. It's totally possible to do all this stuff. First step, I want to turn the gain up a little bit. And then in order to set this, to a G, I'm going to so when I play a C note, it's playing the sample as it is, but that is a G. So what we want to do is set this to be a C. So this is 5 semitones up, we'll get the C. So that's an actual C. And this would be the G right here, which we will find is the same as our original sample. So that's how you're going to tune your samples if you're using simpler, if you don't have sampler. But I definitely recommend using sampler. So right now I'm going to move this into a sampler by just right clicking and click sampler. And then here I'm going to have to reset my root. Put this down to G again. I'm actually going to set this as a higher G because it's a somewhat high-pitched sound. And now in order to make an instrument rack, I want to group this first. And then when I save my instrument rack, I'm going to basically click this button, and this button here, save, is going to save the instrument rack. So I'm going to call this straw blowing, just straw blowing instrument. So I want to see if I can get rid of some of this noise maybe with some EQ. We'll see what we can do, but if not, it's not a big deal. But we definitely want to just cut out some of that weird low end. And this is something that we can also kind of map to a macro here, just to be able to control the sound. So we want to have this set to, at a minimum, be set to around 250 and then go all the way up. So other things we can do with the sound here, I'm thinking is this pitch envelope. So I can turn this down so that it, in the introduction of the sound, it kind of slides up. Something I notice here is that our volume to velocity is kind of set a little bit high. So you want to turn this to 0 so that no matter how hard you hit the key, it's going to be the same volume. If you turn it all the way up, then it's going to be a lot louder if you hit the key harder. But maybe we'll turn this to like 11. So you can hear subtle variation in the loudness as that happens. This particular instrument isn't really amazing. I think it's just inherent in the sample. We're going to add a little bit of reverb to it, and then map the decay time and the dry wet to a macro and call this a reverb. And then we don't want it to go all the way up. Maybe about 10 seconds is good. So that already sounds, when the reverb is up high, it's really nice for like maybe an intro pad. Definitely sounds good with the reverb up high. So I'm gonna save it like that. Boom. And then move on. So now we're gonna get into where we're gonna create a multi-sampler. So pretty much what I'm gonna do with this is make an instrument that you can switch between each of these sounds while you're playing the instrument, and also be able to play all different notes. So, and I believe you could just select them all and say, hey, get in there, and it does it. So if you click this zone button, it'll show you all the different samples there. We have 1 through 7. So what I want to do now is figure out, like I said before, the pitch of each, or the frequency, the fundamental frequency, which these are very high up here, but this one's F sharp. So we'll go in there and tune the first guy to F sharp. Then the second guy is there at an F. These are all going to be very similar because of the glass that I used is the same shape, so its resonant frequencies are going to be similar. So then I'm going to go to click on this second sample and bring this up to an F. I noticed some extra noise here, so I'm just going to cut that off, and then make sure I have over here in my filter global, I have a little bit of release. Turn this up to maybe 100-ish. And that's good. Then moving on to the third one. And that's got a deeper frequency there, which is C sharp. And one up here, which is B. Whoa. So what I can do, since it's kind of right on the edge there, go into my sampler, go to glass clink number 3, and kind of bring up this detune a little bit. These cents go up to 50, which is half of a note, or half of a semitone, and these are each semitones. So there it was at C. I'm going to set it to C sharp, right? And then bring this detune up just a little bit, maybe, yeah, 10, 8, something like that. So now moving on to this fourth one. Yeah, this one's not as easy to define. We've got a D sharp peak there. We've got a C peak there. We've got an A peak there. This it's gonna be this C sharp D type tuning. So I'll put it there on D. And yeah, you can always just mess with this later after you hear how it sounds when you're playing your Midi. Moving on to number 5. This one's another pretty simple one. We have C sharp there, and up here is F. So let's set this to F again. It seemed like that was much louder than the other peak. See, this is confusing here when it says glass clink 1. We're gonna call this glass clink instrument, and then group it just like the other guy. And copy the name to there. And sometimes you want to go in here and move the sample to the very beginning if it's not starting right at the beginning. Sometimes you want a little bit of space there if it's this is something like 1.5 milliseconds, so it's not really going to make a difference. What I say this was a F. Then we have another F there, and an F there as well. Looks like the glass that I used was tuned to an F, or it so happened to be resonating at an F. So let's just check these all. This one I put at a C, number 5. No, this one I also want to put at an F, like I was saying. So then, when I go ahead and play my instrument, something like this definitely needs some delay. So I'm going to grab a ping pong delay and put that on there. Now, how do we switch in between these samples? So what we can do here is, instead of using this key mapping, what this is doing is it's basically playing all the keys at once, which is very cool. So I'm actually going to save this. I'll just call this all, and essentially I'm going to add a couple more effects here. Let's add a high pass here. And yeah, use this filter envelope. So this filter envelope decay is going to be my main macro here. I can set this between like 5 milliseconds and around 3 seconds was pretty nice. It's around 5 seconds. Let me turn this. This amount as well. You can put that on a macro. And our ping pong delay, we can also put that on a macro. And I think that's all right for now. Let's add a chorus. I think it needs that. Put this before the ping pong delay. So that gives it a little more richness to the sound. And that's good for now. We can save this. And that one's called all. So now how would I switch between these samples if I didn't want to play them all at once? So I would go over here to SEL, which stands for chain selector. And that would be using this blue bar to essentially select between which sample is playing. And as you can see, the blue bar is still going to be basically hovering over all of these up until I right click and say distribute ranges equally. And then I can shift to each different sample. They all sound relatively in pitch except for this guy. I think he should have been a F instead of an F sharp. And I can kind of get rid of these three. They're not really jiving with the rest of the instrument. Go ahead and hit distribute ranges equally again to get this back. And then right click on your chain selector here and map this to macro 4. So I'm going to rename this. Instead of saying all, I'm going to say individual and save that also. Just in case, if you want, I'm going to go back to the one that's playing all of them at once, and you can always mute certain ones of these. Oh, playing really low notes there. You can always mute certain ones of these if you want a different sound. But again, I had this at the wrong pitch. That should be an F. There you go. And save that once again and overwrite. All right, so now I'm going to create an instrument for this plastic clap here, or plastic pop, these samples. And I'm just going to speed through this because I already showed you pretty much all the techniques with that last one. So it looks like all of these are hovering around F or G. So I can hit Control A and select all of them there and put this at F sharp, which a lot of them were. And we'll go through and see which ones sound a little off, and then put those up at G. So I'm just going to play through them like this. They all sound pretty much aligned. I could go and use this detune here, but sometimes I like having a little imperfection in my instruments because all instruments in general are imperfect. You know, especially instruments like a violin where there's no frets, you can't ever really get it to be perfectly in tune. You know, frequencies can be ambiguous sometimes with real instruments, so this is something that's cool about using recorded audio to create instruments. So again, I can right click, and first I need to group this and go to my selector and map this to macro 1. And I can do some more cool stuff like reverb. Also, it's always a good idea to add reverb. This definitely needs a high pass as well. And we can add the same type of movement that we did last time with this filter decay and with the amount filter. So resonance can come up a little bit, and I want to set this to one of these other modes. You know, something cool we can do here is, because when I turn this down, it's basically going to be moving the filter in the opposite direction. Right now it's moving the filter like this, but when I turn it into the negative, it's going to be moving in the opposite direction. So I essentially want the filter to be starting up here when it's moving in the opposite direction. And you can hear the movement differently, but it sounds not good there. So how do I do that? I map the frequency as well to this, and I'm going to invert that by right clicking, say invert range. And I don't want it to go all the way, especially here. I want it to end at around 150. And I can simply, if I don't want the filter, I can just turn it off using, whoops, macro 4 here. So that gives me control over the filter if I don't want it. That's a really cool sound. So again, I'm gonna put the reverb on a macro. We can mess with some of these things, turn the quality up to high, mess with this a little bit just to give it some variation. And again, we don't want the time to go all the way up, but There's that. This is our filter movement. I'll just call it the mover. Then let's look at what we can add. That's just an Abelton effect. Perhaps some erosion. For the reverb. And we can map that to macro 6 here and also kind of constrain the movement between, say, 1,000 and 5,000. And we can have the amount linked to macro 7. So this is erosion amount and erosion frequency. So that gives you a nice cool sound when you move the sample selector. This sample in particular, number 3, has this little weird thing here that I'm not really a fan of, so we can move that. Turns out with some of these other ones, the erosion doesn't sound quite that good. You do want to have a little bit of an attack so that there's no popping just in case. So right here, turn this up to about 1 millisecond or so. And I think that's good for this instrument. We're gonna save this again like before, plastic pop instrument, and call this individual. Save that, and then also save a version that plays all of them. So I think I can go and reset this, can I? Since I'm selecting all of them, I can grab it like that and grab it like that. And then rename this to all. So for this, maybe the filter. This is something that you would layer on top of percussion instead of using as an instrument, but you can definitely make your drums more tonal by using this instrument. So I'm going to save that one also. And since you guys kind of get the gist of that, before I make these, I just want to show you some of these other Foleys that I'm going to do some manipulation with and show you some extra techniques here. So I have this pen click groove. As you can hear, there's some background noise, so first we want to put this kind of on its own channel and then put an EQ on it. Kind of get rid of that. So this can kind of be used as a unique little hi-hat sample. So if you turn on my metronome, or if I turn on my metronome, not quite on time, so I can use this shift to kind of warp it to be in time. If I click warp and then shift and kind of drag this, and I can hit alt to basically negate the grid. So I'm holding shift and alt and just dragging this guy. And so you can find some pretty cool stuff in here in terms of finding different types of grooves. Like that would be a very standard one, but then if you want to drag this out to maybe an extra half of a bar there, you can kind of hear this triplets groove, and you can go ahead and like stretch some of these to get it to be right. So you can see how you can kind of manipulate the groove of that and use it in different ways. Next, I want to play around with some of these water swish Foleys. You definitely want to take this off warp, get it back to normal. And then I'm just going to take a regular old snare from here. That's not a snare, what? So I usually will layer my snares up, but something like that sounds alright. Maybe I'll pitch this guy down. But when I add a water Foley sample on it, you'll notice it's really going to bring out some new texture if I leave a little bit of sound before the transient and then turn this back on. Definitely want to bring the volume of that down and probably add some reverb. You can get some much more textured drums by using that, and I had a lot of success with this sample of my roommate's dog eating. This is quite exceptional for layering with drums. So you can take just a random bit of this, which get rid of the reverb, get rid of the warping, like right here. Here's our snare, and here's our snare with the dog eating. Definitely something that will add some unique texture to your drums. And I'm also going to make an instrument with a couple of the best parts of this long sample. So you can essentially throw it into a drum rack and also play these percussion hits that are made out of this dog's mouth as part of your drum rack. So I think we've gone pretty far over how long I wanted this video to be. So I'm going to end it here. But I am also going to make instruments from these sounds. And these guys. Definitely some interesting tonal stuff there. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope you guys learned something. And I hope you will check out my Patreon and my Soundcloud and get all the good stuff there. I love you guys for supporting me. Thank you so much. Yeah. Lots of love to everyone watching. I will see you next time. Yeah, let's go. I am able to wing it perfectly. 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 I am able to wing it. What's up, guys? It is Numotus. I just need to wing it perfectly because I'm gonna wing it perfectly. What's up, guys? It's Numotus. Oh yeah, it takes a long time to do this, but you gotta do it. You just gotta do it. And today I'm gonna be showing you some blah blah blah. I'm so conscious about my hair.